Diet soda is the answer to cutting sugar, you may want to think about that just again. Hey, welcome back, everyone. My name is Dr. Mark Shankman, oral and maxillofacial surgeon, but here to talk about obesity, insulin resistance, and diabetes. So today in the Obesity Project, we're on episode 13. Today's topic, artificial sweeteners exposed, the shocking truth about your sugar-free choices. So, do you think that diet soda is the answer to cutting sugar? You may want to think about that just again. Artificial sweeteners promise 0 calories and weight loss, but the science actually tells a very different story. So, do they really help with weight loss, or are they simply making things worse? So let's break down what they are, how they work, and the real effects on insulin, obesity, and metabolism. So let's start off with what are artificial sweeteners. So lab-created sugar substitutes are designed to taste sweet without the added calories. These artificial sweeteners are found in things like diet sodas, sugar-free snacks, protein bars, and even quote-unquote healthy products. So common ones you may have heard of, and you can see kind of in the pictures behind me, are aspartame, which is like Equal or NutraSweet. A second one called sucralose, which is Splenda. Saccharin, which is Sweet and Low. Acesulfame K, which is Ace K, which I've never actually heard of. And then the one that I've been using actually personally is stevia and monk fruit, which are natural alternatives but still can actually affect insulin levels, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So how do they work? These sweeteners bind to taste receptors on your tongue, actually tricking your brain into thinking that you're consuming sugar. And so the promise is you get the sweetness without the calories. Without the calories or without the blood sugar spikes or without the additional weight gain. But just because they don't have calories, just because they contain 0 calories, doesn't really mean that they're harmless. So I want to talk about the glycemic index next and how it affects insulin and the big lie associated with the glycemic index. So the glycemic index measures how much food raises blood sugar. So each individual item of food, how much of a raise or an increase in blood sugar do we see? So many artificial sweeteners have a glycemic index of 0, meaning they don't actually raise blood sugar, but there's one big caveat to that. And that's insulin response is actually different from blood sugar response. And studies have shown that artificial sweeteners can still trigger insulin release even without calories. So if you were to take a sugar-free but artificially sweetened solution in your mouth and swished it around and spit that liquid out, you would get no calories. You would get artificially sweetened taste in your mouth, and yet what you would actually see is an increase in insulin release. So the brain recognizes sweet, even if it's not sugar, and stimulates that insulin release. And we've got some studies that I can kind of talk about that show this in the studies, in the results of the studies. So there was a 2009 study in diabetes care out of Yale University, which showed that sucralose increased insulin levels by 20% in people who didn't usually consume artificial sweeteners. And then later in 2013, in a study put out by Nature, they found that artificial sweeteners disrupted gut bacteria, leading to glucose intolerance and then ultimately insulin resistance. And then more recently, in a 2020 study out of Cell Metabolism, aspartame and saccharin increased insulin levels despite having absolutely no calories. So multiple studies show this increase in insulin response without actual sugar spiking the blood sugar, spiking the insulin release and the resulting insulin resistance. So, so then the question becomes, do artificial sweeteners really actually help with weight loss at all? So this is the actual artificial sweetener paradox. The artificial sweeteners were meant to reduce calories, which then should lead to weight loss. But as we know, if you watched many of my other videos, or you watch other people talk about these things, you know that reduced calories actually doesn't lead to weight loss. That's a failed experiment. Multiple studies have proven that completely incorrect over the last 50 years. And instead, studies actually show that they're linked to weight gain and metabolic dysfunction. So you may ask yourself why. This doesn't make any sense. There's no calories. Well, calories don't drive obesity. Insulin does. We've talked about this in previous videos. It's not calories. Calories are important. I'm not dismissing that calories are a part of the equation, but they are not the major part. They are not the driving factor. The driving factor is insulin. And although artificial sweeteners lower calories, they still spike that insulin, which ultimately leads to fat storage with the other caloric foods that you're taking in. Artificial sweeteners can also cause brain confusion. Your body expects calories, but then doesn't actually get them. And so what this actually does, this is so counterintuitive and such a huge problem, is they create cravings for real sugar, and those cravings absolutely skyrocket in the presence of artificial sweeteners. So the other thing they can do is they can cause some metabolic slowdown, and longer term use of these artificial sweeteners can lower metabolism, making weight loss harder. And then finally, you have some gut microbiome disruption, and artificial sweeteners harm gut bacteria, which can lead to insulin resistance and obesity. So I want to talk about 3 other studies that confirm these, sort of hypotheses or these theories. In 2017, there was a meta-analysis by the Canadian Medical Association Journal, which reviewed 37 different studies on artificial sweeteners and weight loss. And through that meta-analysis, they found absolutely no evidence that they helped with weight loss in any way. And in fact, some of them actually showed weight gain. In a 2018 study out of the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, that study found that people who drank diet sodas had higher obesity rates than those who drank regular soda. So I know that one on the surface sounds completely backwards and doesn't seem to make any sense, but it goes back to that brain confusion that we talked about, where artificial sweeteners actually trick the body into overeating later. So it creates those cravings, and those cravings cause you to actually eat sugary sweet things that do spike the blood sugar, then do create that insulin release, and you've already got the insulin release from the artificial sweeteners prior. So it actually tricks the body into overeating. And in a 2022 study, pretty recently, in the Journal of American Medical Association, they showed that people who used artificial sweeteners had a higher risk of type 2 diabetes despite consuming fewer calories. So calories are not the thing. Blood sugar is not the main issue. It all goes back to what I always keep talking about in terms of obesity, in terms of insulin resistance, and that's insulin levels. And the artificial sweeteners don't help with that, they hurt. So what's your best choice? I believe your best choice is to avoid the artificial sweeteners, especially in diet sodas and certainly in processed foods. But if you need sweetness, opt for natural alternatives like whole fruit, because the whole fruit actually has products or contains items in that fruit that will buffer against the blood sugar increase, the hyperglycemia that results from eating the sugar. So examples of this are stevia and monk fruit, which are much better options. Even though they may trigger insulin response, they are natural and a little bit better for you. But the best option, of course, is to retrain your taste buds to crave less sweetness altogether. So the bottom line on the artificial sweeteners is that they're not the magic bullet that we were promised. They don't help with weight loss. They may even make things worse. So just avoid them. I think it's just best to, avoid these artificial sweeteners, avoid the sugary drinks, stick to water, stick to tea, stick to coffee. All of these things are much, much more beneficial for you. So the best way to break free, simply ditch the sweeteners, stabilize your insulin, focus on real whole foods. That's your best bet. So have you noticed that artificial sweeteners are affecting your weight or your cravings? If you do, drop a comment in below. I would love to discuss it further in the comment section. So, and please share this with someone who still thinks that diet sodas are healthy. So, again, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for taking the time with me, learning a little something. I hope you got some value out of this. If you did, please like, share, and comment. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll continue to put out lots of great information on obesity, on insulin resistance, on type 2 diabetes, and other chronic illnesses. We're going to get much more into diets and the various diets that lead to increased health. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Thanks so much for watching.